Tables a summary of COVID-19 ESSER funding broken down by school district. I'm happy to take questions on that at any point.
Why don't you start off by explaining
Sure.
why something is pink and something,
Yes.
other portions of it aren't pink?
The pink districts are the districts that received true-up allocations. So true-up was done through ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. That was an effort to equalize for some of the districts that didn't get a proportional amount under their Title I formula.
Committee, are there any questions about the document that Gabriella just told us about? There may be. We will keep hold of these and we may circle back. I'm sorry, did I? Nope? Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and let's get started with our Kansas School for the Deaf budget.
We will start on page 978 with fiscal year 22 for School for the Deaf. The 2021 legislature approved a budget of $11.7 million, including $9.7 million SGF. No adjustments were made subsequently to that amount. The agency requests a revised estimate of $12.5 million, including $9.6 million SGF in fiscal year 2022. That's an all funds increase of just over $763,000, but an SGF decrease of a little over $23,000 from that amount approved by the 2021 legislature. The agency estimate includes 3 adjustments listed there on 978. The first being the Language Assessment Program Phase 3 implementation. The revised estimate includes an increase of just over $545,000, all from special revenue funds. That was transferred from KDHE and ks.gov, its unused funds, in fiscal year 2021. There's also a partial lapse of the State Institutions Building Fund. The revised estimate includes a decrease of $110 from that fund to partially lapse SIBF funding from fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2022. All other adjustments include increased expenditures from special revenue funds to reflect increased revenue in the general fee fund and from the Universal Newborn Screening Fund. The revised estimate includes a capital improvements budget of $1.2 million, all from the SIBF in fiscal year 2022, and that is the same as the approved amount by the 2021 legislature. The revised estimate also includes 143.5 FTE positions, which is the same as the approved amount. Flipping to the next page, the governor recommends expenditures of $12.5 million, including $9.6 million SGF in fiscal year 2022. That's an SGF increase of $17,833 above the agency's revised estimate. That increase is all attributable to the governor's recommendation to implement the 24/7 pay initiative recommended by the Spark Task Force and approved by the State Finance Council. That plan will provide a temporary base pay increase for hourly and salaried staff, pay differentials for hourly personnel, and one-time premium pay allocations up to $3,500 for salaried staff. The governor concurred with the agency's capital improvements revised estimate and concurred with the agency's FTE request for fiscal year 2022. And I can pause there for questions on fiscal year 22.
Committee, are there any questions? Seeing none, you may continue. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Gossage. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was a rather delayed hand raise.
That's okay.
Regarding the nurse pay increase, I'm trying to understand how that falls under the School for the Deaf.
Sure. Madam Chair, members of the committee, the School for the Deaf does have nursing staff under their purview, so they do qualify for that nurse base pay increase.
And when it says a one-time, would this not be continued? I mean,
certainly. So it will be included in fiscal year 2023. It's a temporary base pay increase. So the one-time premium pay itself is one time for that fiscal year, and then it'll be a separate request for fiscal year 2023.
So in 2023 is when we see that it will be made permanent or longer period of time, not a one-time.
It will continue in fiscal year 2023. That's correct.
Okay, but clarify, it doesn't mean that it continues years after.
That's correct.
So it is just I forget what you called it, it's not a bonus, it's the incentive, and then there's the pay increase that's the next year. And after that, it goes off the cliff. It's not budgeted anymore. And again, when you see spark spending, after 2023, those funds are gone. Okay, follow up, and then we have
Yes, please,
Senator
to you,
Sullendrop.
if I may, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, then it's an incentive, I'm assuming, to hire nurses, to make sure they keep nurses on staff. And then when the spark funds drop off, is that when we would just see that now we would expect the state to pay for that? The state funds to pick up the difference where the spark funds left off?
Either the state would pay for it or they would not.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Sullendrop. Oh, okay, sorry. Yes, Senator Dietrich.
Thank you. And this is a Spark Funds question. Those dollars are separate, I thought, from agency budgets, but yet it's in here. Is it just to inform us? Or am I misunderstanding?
I'm going to let legislative research answer that question. Go ahead, JG.
Madam Chair, this was something that was approved by the Spark Executive Committee and the State Finance Council previously, so this was done early in the process, and so it is included in this budget. Most of them do not have that included.
Other questions? Okay, and I think you'll find, at least in Public Health Committee, we had a very similar thing about pay increases, but those are very short term. You may continue.
We will move on to page 981. The agency requests $13.1 million, including $10.4 million SGF for fiscal year 2023. This is an all funds increase of just over $585,000, including an SGF increase of just over $856,000 above the fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. The fiscal year 2023 estimate, or request, includes the adjustments listed on page 981 and the top of page 982. The first two are both enhancement requests, the first being the request to increase dorm and paraprofessional salaries. The agency requests $112,820 all SGF for a 10% increase for dorm and paraprofessional staff salaries and wages. The agency stated this funding is necessary to compete with other higher paying job opportunities in the area and recruit and retain dorm and paraprofessional staff. The second and third are both for the language assessment program for phase 3 and phase 4 implementation. Phase 3 is the request of $466,658 all SGF to fund phase 3. That includes salaries and wages, contractual services, and would continue the language assessment program that was previously funded through different funds. Enhancement number 3 is also for the language assessment program for phase 4, and that estimate is $192,207 all SGF. Item number 4 is a statutory teacher salary increase. KSA 76-11A17 requires teachers at the Kansas State School for the Deaf to be paid as the same as the teachers at USD 233 Olathe in the prior year. The agency's request included just over $75,000 for that purpose, which was a 2.5% increase. The top of the page includes an adjustment for capital improvements. The request includes an increase of just over $323,000 from the SIBF to reflect capital improvement increases. That was primarily due to planned classroom renovation and increased rehab and repair. All other adjustments include a decrease of just over $584,000 all SGF, all funds, and an SGF increase of just over $9,000. Those changes primarily reflect the end of one-time funding from KDHE and KSDE for the language assessment program. And the agency request includes a capital improvement budget of $1.5 million, all SIBF, and includes the request of 143.5 FTE positions. And that is the same as the fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. On page 982, the governor recommends expenditures of $12.5 million, including $9.9 million SGF for fiscal year 2023. That's an SGF decrease of just over $569,000 below the agency's fiscal year 2023 request. And it does include the items listed there on page 982. The governor recommends adding just over $33,000 SGF to continue the 24/7 pay initiative recommended by the Spark Task Force and approved by the State Finance Council. That will continue the temporary base pay increase as well as the temporary pay differentials. The second item on that page is the additional teacher salary increase. The governor's recommendation includes an additional $56,010 SGF to fund the statutory teacher salary increase. When the agency submitted their budget, USD 233 hadn't finished their teacher salary negotiations, and there was an additional portion of funding required. The last two items include the governor not recommending the agency's enhancement request for language assessment program phase 3 and phase 4 implementation. The governor did concur with the agency's capital improvements budget and concurred with the agency's request for 143.5 FTE positions. And I'm happy to stand for questions.
Committee, do you have any questions of Gabriella, or would you like to direct your questions to the Superintendent, Luann Barron? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 982, number 8, additional teacher salary increase. Can you explain, I don't completely understand the Olathe completing the teacher salary negotiations piece.
Certainly. So when the agency submitted their budget, they were working off the teacher salaries that they had for Olathe 233 for the current year. After the budget was submitted, Olathe finished their negotiations, and statute requires that the teachers at the Kansas State School for the Deaf be paid in the same amount as Olathe in the previous year. So there was a salary adjustment after they submitted their budget.
So the School for the Deaf is located in Olathe, but it is not a part of the Olathe School District. But I believe that is how they came to what those would be, based on what gets negotiated. Other questions? Senator Petty.
Well, just to follow up with that, I mean, you might remember better than I, but a number of years ago, their salary was tied to Olathe's.
Right, it still is.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
Just saying, when you were expanding on it.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, that's why.
right. Other questions? Okay, so what questions? Let's now transition and let's welcome Luann Barron, our superintendent from the Kansas School for the Deaf. Oops, I'm sorry. Yes, JG.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I misspoke. The School for the Deaf, the nursing classification was the same as other classifications that got the ARPA funding. The School for the Deaf did not get the ARPA funding. They put in state general fund for that increase in 22 and in 23 to keep the classification the same in that facility as the other facilities had.
Okay. So that was SGF, not ARPA. Okay. Thank you. Now we'll direct questions to our superintendent. Committee, what questions do you have? I'll start, maybe get us rolling. Why did the governor not recommend the payment for LAP phase 2, or excuse me, phase 3 implementation and phase 4 implementation? Can you shed some light on that?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. As in previous years, we've made the request, and I believe this is the fourth time I've requested enhancement dollars that the governor has not recommended supporting that. And so the LAP program is itself is statutory. So I believe the recommendation is that the governor wants us to find an alternative funding solution that is available somewhere from the state, whether that's through the Department of Education or the Department of Health. And I have further comments as to that within my testimony that I'll be providing shortly. And I hope that will answer the questions more in depth and provide clarity for, again, why I am continuing to request funds for the LAP program. So the statute that provided LAP shows that KSD is responsible for managing the budget and overseeing the program. And so we are trying to follow what is written in statute.
Committee, do you have questions? Or why don't we just go ahead and have the superintendent, would you just go ahead and share what you have prepared for your presentation?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and distinguished members of the committee. I wish I could attend today in person, but it's fortunately I can attend virtually at this time. I want to take this opportunity to thank the legislature for the budget to address our needs and to discuss our enhancements. We serve approximately 750 students statewide. I'm sorry, the interpreter is having a hard time seeing Luann. It's a little bit choppy. I'm going to ask her to repeat some of what she said. So as I said, we serve approximately 750 students statewide and these are children who are deaf, hard of hearing, and we want to ensure that they're receiving appropriate and equitable educational opportunities. We request that the committee concur with the governor's recommendations for fiscal year 23, and that were explained in our budget requests. I'm here with an additional request asking you to consider enhancement funding for our language assessment program. As many of you may be familiar with, since 2016, both the House and Senate unanimously passed KSA 755397E, which mandates that every child birthed through age 8 who are deaf and hard of hearing be assessed annually to ensure that they are meeting their age-appropriate linguistic milestones and that they are developing language skills. In addition to the state law, the Kansas School for the Deaf was designated as the lead agency to establish and administer the statewide language assessment program in compliance with statute. Our results show that 80% of these children are still not meeting their age-appropriate language milestones. So now I want to discuss our requests for SGF enhancement funds to support both phase 3 and phase 4 of implementation of the language assessment program. I will present our enhancement request and then our additional alternative solution that was developed in conjunction with the Kansas State Department of Education and the Department of Health and Environment. We would prefer a full SGF enhancement for phase 3 of $466,658 with the intent of full implementation of phase 3 that we had intended in phase 3 was intended to begin in FY21 with the goal of assessing 250 children, but due to COVID and previous lack of funding, expansion for the birth to 3 age group statewide was not possible. Both the Department of Ed and the Department of Health agreed to assist in funding of Phase 3 for the language assessment program for the current fiscal year 22. With clear understanding and information that this funding was a one-time funding in order to be utilized to implement Phase 3 for FY22 only. Because they were able to fund for 1 year, we are now seeking funding for Phase 3, and therefore KSD is requesting $466,658 for enhancement during FY23. You may have noticed that there's an additional request for enhancement dollars for Phase 4 of $192,207. Because again, we only received the 1 year for FY22 from KSDE and the Department of Health, we need additional funds to support Phase 4 implementation, as well as Phase 5, which will be our final phase of implementation. The goal is to reach in Phase 4, 400 children by FY23. So therefore, we are requesting $192,207 for a total of $658,865 to provide sustainable and long-term funding for the statewide LAP DHH for FY23. This total request for a full implementation of Phase 3 and Phase 4, and the reason that we're requesting SGF funds for the implementation of Phases 3 and 4 is that to fully fund this program, this is the ideal solution so that children in the state of Kansas will not fall through the cracks. We want to ensure that they have full language facilities as they reach school age. The burden of running and managing this program is on the Kansas School for the Deaf. We have a wonderful program that we've established. We've been working on it for 4 years, and we're already starting to see results, and we're starting to see upticks due to our efforts. So we're requesting more permanent and sustainable funding. In addition, that sustainable funding would help us to continue our groundbreaking research that is being done in collaboration with the University of Kansas that will impact deaf education, not only in the state, but in fact, nationwide. We are the first state in the nation to be collecting and utilizing this type of data to this depth. Maintaining the fidelity of this program is essential. In terms of the background, there are approximately 20 other states who have similar programs to ours, but each looks a little bit different. But none of them have collaborations with a Research One university such as we do with the University of Kansas. So this research is allowing us to gain greater understanding so that we can improve our data and improve our interventions on language milestones and how they're achieved, and to improve and mitigate those language gaps. In lieu of a full enhancement with SGF dollars, we do offer a possible alternative solution. Our alternative solution includes $386,000 SGF for the birth to 3. Understand that this is a full funding enhancement for Phases 3 and 4. If we are not, this is actually a partial enhancement, 386, rather than the total amount listed earlier. This would fully fund the birth to 3 portion of the LAP DHH program. I'll explain why we're asking for that money in this way for the birth to 3 in a little bit. In addition, the remaining portion of the LAP DHH funding required for students ages 3 through 8 could be collected from unified school districts, special ed cooperatives, and interlocals through a fee-for-service approach. I want to jump down to the bottom paragraphs of my testimony in terms of the fee-for-service. And I'll discuss that even more so in a little bit. The challenges for this alternative solution are that the temporary funding from FY22 from KDHE, that money was only available due to money that had been set aside for other purposes and projects that were unable to be completed. And so they were able to support the LAP funding with those dollars. Unfortunately, they've let us know that that money will not be available to us moving forward. And so if they were to fund LAP, that means they would have to divert funds from the birth to 3 portion of Part C funding, which would reduce services across the state for all children with disabilities, including children who are deaf and hard of hearing. And it would create staffing issues and reduce the frequency of services. In terms of working with staff at Tiny K networks and local school districts, we're exploring that. However, pardon the interpreter, again, going back to the issue of it would create staffing issues for KDHE in terms of what their staff was available for and reduced frequency of services for all students, all children with disabilities statewide. Moving on to the age group of 3 through 8, those children are educated in various settings, including general education, special education, 504 plans, and private and home schools. This will require the development of a systemic approach that invoices the appropriate billing entities. And a fee would need to provide equitable services for both local and distant students, as well as pay for a part-time position to facilitate the billing of the appropriate entities and other accounting tasks. For full implementation of LAP for ages 3 to 8, these fees billed to the school districts include the current estimated cost of $472,097 plus an additional $21,060 for a part-time clerk for a total of $493,157 through the billing process for fee-for-service. We have explored utilizing staff from Tiny K programs and local school districts. However, it is believed that local programs do not have the training or expertise or experiencing in assessing children who are deaf and hard of hearing. The data collected would no longer be consistent in validity or fidelity, and thus that would alter the reliability of the data that is being provided to the legislature and being used for research purposes in conjunction with the University of Kansas. So this solution allows children to receive appropriate assessments from highly qualified staff, as well as the legislature to receive accurate data. We then have proposed wording for the fee fund. And we want to thank the legislature. So going back, we want to talk about that we still see that there are some improvements being made, but we need to do more. We want the LAP program. We are committed to advancing the program so that we lead to positive language acquisition in Kansas children who are deaf, hard of hearing. Early language acquisition will result in early fluent communication. This is a responsibility that we take seriously, and thus we are requesting the enhancement dollars to meet the statutory requirement. either through the full enhancement as originally proposed or through our proposed alternate solution.
Okay. We have a question from Senator Solentrop. We're going to address your question. Go
Thank you,
ahead.
Madam Chair. How many potential students have you identified younger than you're treating now across the state that you want to pull into the program to assist in early learning?
Are you wanting to know the age 0 through 3?
Yeah.
Let's start with age 0 through 3.
However they categorize them.
I don't have exact breakdown of numbers. I know that we have already assessed 110 children statewide since we began this program. Well, from last January to June, we're changing our fiscal year tracking in terms of those data reports. In the birth to 3 age category, it's predicted that we want to reach 200 children for phase 3 for full implementation. Or by the time we get to full implementation, we suspect there'll be about 352 children total. And then it'll be 752 children birth to age 8. These estimates are based on where we know deaf, hard of hearing children are in the state, identified through their IEP process. That's how we've received those numbers. But we understand that that data does not include anyone who's on a 504 plan. So we believe that there are some students who have not been identified yet. So we believe that the total number is 752, but we think it's going to be higher than that. Once we reach phase 5 and have full implementation, we'll be able to identify deaf, hard of hearing children who may have not previously been identified as having a hearing loss.
Follow up.
Please, thank you. Do you have a virtual learning program? How did you handle things during the pandemic? Were they in the classroom?
We have been open to in-person classes from the beginning and throughout the pandemic. We closed for about a month at the beginning of the pandemic. In terms of our language assessment, we did some virtual assessments, but the results were skewed because those types of assessments, they're assessing language, both spoken language and manual language, and it's best done in person. And so right now, the number of completed assessments that we've done is a little bit low due to the pandemic, but we have increased the number of in-person home visits and school visits in order to provide full assessments.
Committee, any other questions? Senator Dietrich.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. If I'm thinking in past presentations, I believe we heard that most of these students have IEPs that you're assessing. Is that correct?
Most deaf, hard of hearing children, if they've been identified as deaf or hard of hearing, have been distinguished as having an exceptionality and identified that way. But some children who do have a hearing loss have been identified as having a developmental delay or a different label for IEP purposes. And so those are the students who we're missing at the current time. And that's what's leading to kind of a skew of our estimate of how many children will be included in the program.
Thank you.
Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Superintendent, for being here. I don't know, I want to make sure that I heard this correctly, but I thought you said that the legislation directed that the school for the deaf be, do all the testing and be responsible for all the funding. Is that, but I thought at the time that actually KDHE was, the School for the Deaf was going to work with KDHE because Child Find's already in place for 0 to 3, and then work with the State Department of Education for the funding for through the age 8. And I don't recall that that specifically was spoken to in the legislation. So could you clarify that for me, please?
Certainly. I'm happy to explain that further. So the statute never stated that the Kansas School for the Deaf be responsible for the statewide assessment program. That's not how the statute is written. The Kansas Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing has oversight of the language assessment program. And throughout several meetings that occurred in searching for an entity that would be able to house and with the appropriate skills and expertise to provide these assessments to children who are deaf and hard of hearing, the Kansas School for the Deaf was identified and designated as the lead. So at that time, I accepted the responsibility to do the LAP program. And this was a statute that did not come with a funding mandate. And so that's why every year since I have been coming before you to request an enhancement for the program. The statute said that the Department of Health and the Department of Ed are accountable for the funding portion of the program. But the challenge remains that both the Department of Health does not have the funds for it, and the Department of Ed came up with a potential solution of coming up with a fee-for-service structure. However, KDHE in the Birth to 3, they said, we still don't have the funding for the language assessment program. So that's what's proposed in our alternate solution is an enhancement that would cover in full the Birth to 3, while for 3 to 8, we would come up with the billing fee-for-service plan. Does that help clarify your question?
A little bit. I'll listen to the rest of the testimony. Thanks.
At this time, we are going to need to pause this portion because we still need to have the overview on the Kansas School for the Blind budget. And so I am going to ask, John Harding, you are here, correct? Yep. I knew that you were. Our superintendent's sitting right there. So I guess my question is, do you want to start with your ask, or do you want Gabriella to go through it? Okay. So Gabriella, if you can share with us what the ask is of the agency, what the recommendation is of the governor, and then we'll direct our questions to Superintendent Harding. I do want to give a special thank you to Superintendent Barron for being with us virtually.
Certainly. I will start on page 957. The agency requests a revised estimate of $7.8 million, including $5.8 million SGF. That's an all funds increase of just over $103,000 and an SGF decrease of just over $13,000. The revised estimate includes a capital improvement budget of just over $919,000, all from the state institution's building fund, and it includes 81.5 FTE positions. The governor recommends expenditures of $7.9 million, including $5.8 million SGF, which is an increase of $12,533, all SGF, above the agency's revised estimate. That increase is entirely attributable to the nurse base pay increase we discussed with the other school. She also concurred with the capital improvements budget and the FTE request. Moving to fiscal year 2023, the agency requests $8.6 million, including $5.9 million SGF for fiscal year 2023. You'll see the adjustments listed on page 960. You'll again see the teacher salary increase. That is $48,519. There's also a capital improvement increase. And the requested FTEs are the same as fiscal year 2022. Flipping to the governor's recommendation, the governor recommends total expenditures of $8.4 million, including $5.9 million SGF. That's an all funds decrease of just over $220,000 and an SGF increase of just over $44,000. There was that adjustment similar to the Kansas State School for the Deaf for the teacher salary after negotiations were done with USD 233 Olathe. The governor's recommendation also includes the nurse base pay increase, and there was an error, number 6 on page 961. When the budget was submitted, the rehab and repair budget was accidentally doubled, so the governor did correct that in her budget. The governor concurred with the agency's request for FTE positions as well, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Okay, are there any questions for Gabriella, or do you have any questions for Superintendent Harding? Well, Superintendent Harding, since I don't see any questions for Gabriella, why don't you come up and share with us your perspective as far as what's going on with our School for the Blind, and share with us your needs.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee. I appreciate the opportunity today. I'm John Harding, the Superintendent, School for the Blind, Kansas City, Kansas. And I just first want to express our gratitude to the state legislature for supporting our school and students across the state who are blind, visually impaired. I'm just here to ask again that you concur with the governor's budget. School for the Blind is needed more than ever, and we offer what no other school really can provide. We have over 32 highly qualified vision specialists who impact over 800 students across the state who are blind or low vision. That's 120 districts, over 80 counties actually each year. And this has really been accomplished by growing our outreach services with really no additional funding. That's simply by being more efficient with what we have. We partner with other schools, and we think we're pretty efficient with what we do and effective and equitable when we provide those services. So we'd like to do even more. I think it's important to point out that we provide services to students in rural parts of our state with low cost or no cost services and programs. These are things like professional development, mentorship for new teachers, low vision clinics, summer school programming, Braille materials, online classes, things like this. Really proud of some of our programs that are very unique and innovative. Our makerspace on our campus is really unique and different. It allows students who are blind, low vision to access some high-tech equipment so they can dream, design, and create like other kids. So I'm very proud of that. We also take our mobile STEM unit across the state to schools that invite us out and work in inclusive settings so teachers and other students can see what it's like for our students to access high-tech equipment, robotics, coding, things like that. It's been a lot of fun. I would just point out a couple of other things. We also have 2 other programs I just will mention. Our Project Search is a new program that we're excited about to give students access to work experience in the community. We're partnering with the Greater Kansas City YMCA's next year. We're only the 2nd school for the blind to do this. And the program is set up so that 80% of the graduates nationwide do obtain employment, at least part-time, when they complete the program. It's a big deal for us to do that. Also want to mention our online computer science course. It's the only one in the United States that partners with Microsoft Teams to offer accessible online computer science for students across the state. So we're trying to grow that program. High expectations for kids who really need it, especially in our field. So Our private partnerships are growing. We have a nonprofit 501c3 that supports our school. We raised over $63,000 last year through our 5K run and walk, so I'd invite you to that, and we hope to use that to rehab our gym. Again, I would just like to ask you support the governor's recommended budget, and thank you for your consideration, Madam Chair and committee. I'll stand for questions.
Go back to the number of students that you're serving, because you addressed 120 school districts, 80 counties. So how many kids are in those school districts, and then how many kids do you have there in your actual school?
Yeah, good question. The three numbers I always give, Madam Chair, are 50. That's the number of students that we have on our campus, and that sounds very small, and it is. But remember, these are the kids who are really sent to us because they cannot be educated elsewhere. So that's a pretty good number proportionately. We touch over 800 students, and that's including direct service materials and programs, students that come to our services either on campus or across the state. Total numbers of students, we're not authorized to count those students, surprisingly, and I wish we had that authority, but we know there's at least 1,500 students in this state who are blind or low vision in ways that impact their education. And we believe we serve 800 of those based on our data that we collect throughout the year. So does that answer your question?
It does, but explain to us why you can't count a goodly portion of almost half.
Yeah, we're not authorized to count, and so the only time that we find out about students is when a local district asks us to come in and provide services. So really, it's going through back doors rather than through front doors. But we've become very efficient at that. I simply would prefer to go through the front door if we could.
Well, I'd rather have you go through the front door, too. Okay, so I've got right over here, we're going to go with Senator Straub, Senator O'Shea. All right, we'll do the other way. O'Shea, then Senator Straub.
She had her hand up first.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just curious why, who doesn't authorize you to do that? What's the entity?
Madam Chair, I believe that would probably have to come from either the legislature or perhaps the State Board of Education. It's a complicated equation, but I know that when inclusion became the law of the land in 1975, I believe the presumption is that all schools would serve all their children. And so that presumption still exists today. And we support inclusion, I want to be clear about that, but we're only asked to come in when we receive a request from a local school district.
So unlike the test that's mandated, the hearing test that's mandated on newborns, there is not a mandate for any type of testing on vision.
No, there's no equivalent test. There are tests for vision, but they're not equivalent tests. Vision develops later typically, so the tests would not always pick up vision loss at that stage. But a good question.
But there's not at any stage where, okay, that's good for us to know. Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and maybe I just can't find it here in the paperwork we were given, but how much in COVID relief funds did the school receive in total?
Madam Chair, I would just ask to Gabrielle, I see she's looking through the materials. I don't have it at the top of my head, so I'm reluctant to give you that number.
I just assumed that the School of the Blind wasn't immune to COVID, and I know we've seen hundreds of millions of dollars in the state education budget, so I was just concerned of how that has affected your teaching and how that affects your budget going forward.
Madam Chair, although I don't have the specific figures, I can offer assurance we did receive some COVID dollars. Those were mostly allocated to us either from the governor's office or through the State Board of Education gave us some dollars. And COVID did impact us like it did everybody else, but we remained open through flexibility and the tremendous work of our staff. Like Luann said at the School for the Deaf, we were closed temporarily last year for about a month, but we have remained open ever since.
Committee, other questions or comments? Senator Petty.
I noticed that you've had that capital improvement projects for your HV and the boiler, and so is that will be completed in '23 or?
Madam Chair, I think those are usually, the large projects are usually multi-year projects, so we usually ask the governor's office and the legislature to fund it in 2 years increments. So depending on the funding that we receive, typically we're able to complete those in 2 years. So for instance, we are asking for an elevator. That would be a 2-year project, and many of our large asks, like the boiler system or the HVAC, are typically 2-year requests. Not sure if that answers your question.
23 is the last of those 2 years?
It will, for the requests that we have in front, the 23 would be the last year, correct?
Thank you.
Talk to us a little bit about the elevator. So you don't have one right now?
No, Madam Chair, we have old buildings. Somebody asked me last year, how old are your buildings? And we have one from 1899, I believe, the second oldest building in Wyandotte County. But most of our buildings are from 1950 or 1970s. Our newest building is from 1994, our dormitory. The pool was built in 1950 at the same time as our Brighton building, and we're proud of keeping our old buildings in good shape. But right now, students who use the pool who are in wheelchairs have to go down the hill and around the corner to the backside of the pool entrance. So that's why we would request an elevator for safety. They do this in winter too, year-round.
I'm going to ask legislative research to look into this, but that seems to me a violation of access. I don't know of any building today that has multi-levels that isn't mandated for access, federal access, to have an elevator. And quite frankly, I don't think that that should be a budgetary ask when we're talking about spark money that's one-time money. Those type of fixed improvements, particularly when we're talking about kids that are already there because they have one identified disability, should not have to be wheeled outside to get to and from a swimming pool. Committee, I hope that we can join in urging that our Spark Committee address this issue, because I don't think it's something that you should wait on.
If I could, Madam Chair, I do believe we did apply for ARPA funds through the Spark Committee and included those requests in that application. So we're hoping to receive funding for that purpose.
Okay, so how soon ago, how long ago did you apply?
Madam Chair, I believe we applied last week. I believe we submitted it late last week.
I believe that if you would go ahead and say that aloud, Senator Dietrich, so that we can get it into minutes.
Madam Chair, is it possible that we could do letters of support for his application? I think this is essential.
I believe that we should. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did you submit that to the Health and Education Spark Advisory Panel by chance?
Madam Chair, I believe we did. I get a little confused on the nomenclature, so I know that it was submitted at the request of, I believe, House K-12 Chair, or the committee itself requested we do that.
Well, for full disclosure, Senator Sykes and I serve on that panel, so you can direct your support or letters to us, and we'll be happy to pass that along. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. Senator Petty.
Do you by chance know when you're meeting? Because I've heard that about some other ones. That
Need
they're
a
not meeting
deadline on
letters.
when those letters have to get sent.
Go ahead, Senator Sykes.
I don't know the deadline for that, but I think the deadline for applications is tomorrow for all of those grants.
It is.
It is, the application deadline is tomorrow, so good. You've got yours in. We are meeting Friday and then March 2nd, so there will be some movement soon. So get those in quickly.
Okay, now, JG, thank you for raising your hand. I will call on you. We got a little Wild West here, but go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have monthly meetings with the Spark Task Force coordinator. And right now, the goal is to have those finalized in the April-May timeframe. So it will have to go through the advisory panels to the task force and be approved there, and then approved by the state Finance Council. So that's kind of the goal. It might be post-budget time.
Well, you don't have the elevator in here. Is that correct? The elevator isn't in this budget. Or is it?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Which budget are you referring to?
It's not in 2022, it's in 2023, correct? Yeah. Yeah. I do want to say we are out of time, but I want to thank you for your presentation. It is refreshing, it is exciting, the things that you are accomplishing. And I think that we do need to get our heads together and come up with what can be done, because if you're serving, by your count, 800 kids, and your guesstimation is that there are really 1,500 or more in our state, those kids all need to be counted. Those families need to receive the support that you have to offer. So thank you for enlightening us, opening our eyes to what's going on within the state, and thank you so much.
Thank you for listening, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Committee, thank you for your attention today. Tomorrow, we have two things that we need to work on. We need to pass out our budgets with any change recommendations. And likewise, we do have a hearing on Senate Bill 496. So we will be starting promptly tomorrow at 1:30. So thank you for your participation today. We are adjourned.